My fiancé told me to go enjoy my bachelorette trip before the wedding, but I came home early and caught him cheating on me. My fiancé kept kissing my forehead like he was trying to stamp his innocence on me. That sounds dramatic. But tell me why a man who had never been especially clingy suddenly turned into a walking greeting card the week before our wedding. Every time I came into the kitchen, there he was with that soft little smile, touching my arm, asking if I was excited, asking if I had packed for the resort, asking if I had texted my friends back. It wasn't sweet, not really. It felt managed, like he was trying to keep me pointed in one direction long enough for something else to happen behind my back. I was 31, tired in the specific way women get tired when they have a full-time job, a half-finished seating chart, a mother who thinks stress is proof you're disorganized, and a man saying, "We're almost there," like that sentence pays invoices. He was 30, freelancing, always between projects, which sounded noble until the rent came due. For most of the last year, I had been carrying more than my share because I loved him, and because I kept telling myself, partnership means sometimes one person is steadier for a while. Yes, I know. Please don't start. I've already had this argument with myself in at least 12 different showers. My friends had planned a bachelorette weekend at a resort out in the country. All fireplaces and trails and women pretending we still enjoyed matching pajamas. The wedding was set for the following Saturday, giving us one final girls' weekend before everything changed. I almost canceled twice. Not because I didn't love them. I did. But something about leaving him alone that weekend sat wrong in my chest. He had decided not to do a bachelor party, which on paper made him look mature and above nonsense. His explanation was that he needed the weekend to work and make up for the time he'd be taking off for the wedding. Very responsible, very adult, very fake, as it turns out. The weirdness had started in little ways. He stopped answering video calls unless I texted first. When I asked what he had for lunch, he gave me those vague, useless answers men give when they don't want follow-up questions. Just grabbed something. Nothing exciting. I'm slammed. He also kept bringing up the resort. You have to go. Your friends worked hard on this. Don't make it weird by canceling. Don't make it weird. That line stuck with me. Because why would it be weird for a bride to want to stay home the week before her wedding unless somebody really needed her gone? On Thursday night, the night before I left for the weekend, I stood in our bedroom trying to zip a duffel bag that did not need to be as heavy as it was. And he came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and rested his chin on my shoulder. He said, "I want you to have fun and stop worrying about me." Which would have been cute if it didn't sound exactly like a man auditioning for a jury. I laughed and said I wasn't worrying. He said, "Good," too fast, and then kissed my cheek like we had landed something important. On Friday morning's drive to the resort, my friends were sending voice notes. The group chat was loud, and I kept staring at the highway like maybe my body knew something my brain was refusing to sign for. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself stress makes everything feel suspicious. I told myself not every strange vibe is a betrayal. Sometimes a man is just distracted. Sometimes a wedding makes people weird. Sometimes your nervous system is just a rude little alarm system that goes off because somebody breathed too hard in another room. Still, when I got there and everybody ran over with drinks and fake outrage because I was the last one to answer the room assignment message, I felt split down the middle. Half of me smiled and let them pull me in. Half of me was still back home, staring at our front door in my mind like it already knew more than I did. That first night at the resort should have been easy. Fire pit, cheap wine, one friend trying to make us all play a question game that somehow always turned into soft public humiliation. Everybody was warm and loud and sentimental in the way people get when they're happy for you, and also a little relieved it isn't their turn yet. I laughed where I was supposed to laugh. I made the little bride speeches. I even let them put a ridiculous veil on me for photos. But there was this constant drag under my ribs, like my brain had one hand on the emergency brake the entire time. My best friend noticed first. She always does, and I hate that for me. She sat down beside me with a drink and went, "Why do you look like you're about to either cry or commit tax fraud?" I told her I was just tired. She raised one eyebrow in that deeply annoying way that says she has known me too long to accept a lazy lie. I brushed it off. I said wedding stress. I said my mother. I said too many opinions about flowers. All technically true. None of it the real thing. We stayed up later than we should have, and Saturday morning I woke with that dry mouth, puffy face, low-grade headache combo that makes you feel like your own body is retaliating. I stood in the bathroom staring at myself, mascara shadow under my eyes, hair doing something hateful, and I had this stupid thought that hit me so hard I actually sat down on the edge of the tub. I want to go home and cook dinner for him. Not because that's my job. Not because I'm one of those women. Just because I suddenly needed to see him being ordinary. Needed to watch him stand in the kitchen and complain about work and reach for a spoon and prove my instincts wrong. I tried to talk myself out of it for maybe 20 minutes. Maybe 30. I paced around the room while my friends were downstairs hunting coffee like survivalists. I kept thinking, if you leave now, you'll look insane. If you go home and find nothing, You'll have driven all that way because your anxiety wanted attention. But the longer I ignored it, the worse it got. It changed from nerves into certainty so quietly, I almost missed the moment. 1 second, I was embarrassed by my own suspicion. The next, I knew I needed to get in my car. I told the group I had a headache and wanted to go pick up some medicine in town. One of them offered to come with me. I said no too quickly, then smiled in a way that probably looked like I was being normal, but definitely was not. My best friend followed me outside anyway. She leaned against my car and said, "Something's wrong." Not a question, just a fact, laid between us. I almost told her then. Almost said, "I think my fiancé is lying to me and I don't know why, and I feel stupid for even saying that out loud." Instead, I shook my head and said I needed air. The drive back to the city felt longer than it should have. I kept switching between anger and embarrassment, which is a nasty combination because you feel dramatic and justified at the same time. Every few minutes, I'd decide I was ridiculous. Then I'd remember his face when he told me to enjoy the weekend, that eager little push in his voice, and my stomach would tighten all over again. By the time I reached our street, my hands were cold on the wheel even though the heat was on. Then I saw the car in the driveway. Not his, not mine, not anybody I knew. Just some unfamiliar car sitting there like it paid bills in that house too. His car was in the garage, which meant he was home. Which meant the "I'll be working all day" thing was already dead before I even turned off the engine. I didn't get out right away. I just sat there staring, like maybe a reasonable explanation would float down from the sky and land on the hood. Delivery? Friend? Neighbor emergency? Surprise? Pick a lie. Pick anything. My heart was pounding so hard it made my throat hurt. Instead of going in, I called him. He answered on the second ring, voice bright, casual, easy. "Hey, baby." I looked at the garage. I looked at the strange car. Then I asked where he was. "At work," he said, without even a pause. That was the moment something inside me went cold. Not cracked, not shattered. Cold. Like my body was done bargaining and had moved on without telling me. I kept him on the phone longer than I needed to because I wanted to hear whether guilt changed his breathing. It didn't. That was somehow the worst part. He sounded cheerful, distracted, mildly annoyed in the way people act when they're pretending to be busy and need you to help them maintain the costume. I asked how his day was going. He said he was drowning in deadlines. I asked if he had eaten. He laughed and said not yet, poor overworked him. Then he told me he loved me, twice, with this syrupy enthusiasm that made me grip the steering wheel until my fingers hurt. I said, "Maybe I'll come by later." He answered way too fast. "Don't. I'll probably be here late." There it was again. That little shove away from the door. When he hung up, he sent 3 messages in under a minute. A heart, a kissing face, then, "Miss you already," which would have made a stranger cry into her coffee if she didn't know he had just lied to her while standing in the house we shared. I sat there maybe another minute, maybe 5. Time gets slippery when humiliation enters the room. My first impulse was to march in through the front door and force whatever was happening to look me in the face. My second impulse was to drive straight through the garage and let the universe explain the rest. Instead, I did neither, which I guess is proof that even at my messiest, I still have a shred of self-preservation. I got out quietly and moved along the side of the house, feeling ridiculous and sick at the same time. We had this narrow path leading toward the backyard, half gravel, half dead leaves, and I remember hearing every tiny sound my shoes made like the entire world had become a microphone. The curtains in our bedroom were partly closed, not enough to see much from that angle, but enough to let voices slip through. His voice first, low, amused, intimate, then a woman laughing. My knees actually weakened. I know people say that in stories all the time, but I'm serious. My legs did this awful watery thing, and I had to put one hand on the siding to keep from folding onto the ground like a badly packed chair. I pulled out my phone on instinct and hit record, not because I had some genius plan, but because when your life cracks in half, you suddenly want receipts. You want proof that later, when somebody tries to smooth it down into a misunderstanding, you will have something besides your own wrecked face. I couldn't see them clearly through the gap in the curtain, just blur and movement and enough shape to turn my stomach. But I could hear. That was plenty. More than plenty. His laugh, her voice, the rustle of sheets. Then him saying something low and smug that made my hands start shaking harder. I couldn't catch every word, but I caught enough. Enough to know he felt safe. Enough to know this wasn't a confused accident or a one-time emotional slip. He sounded comfortable, like he had rehearsed the lie and settled into it. At one point she laughed and he said, "I can't believe we're doing this here. Here. In our bed. In the room where half the wedding stuff was piled in stupid labeled bags because apparently irony likes props." I should tell you that I did not burst in dramatically. I did not kick the door. I did not scream. Part of that was shock. Part of it was pride. Part of it was the horrible understanding that if I walked in there too soon, he would switch instantly from guilty man to manager of my emotions. He would start explaining, pleading, grabbing my wrists, trying to make the scene bigger than the choice. And I could already feel my brain shorting out. I could not afford his version of chaos on top of mine. Then came the sound I will spare you detail about because honestly, it doesn't need detail to be disgusting. Intimacy, obvious, and undeniable. I stopped recording. I backed away so fast I nearly slipped. My body took over at that point. I got into my car, locked the doors like they were going to run outside after me, and sat there with both hands over my mouth because I thought I might actually throw up. I remember staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror and thinking, this cannot be happening to me in my own driveway. Not because I thought I was special, just because it felt absurd. Like, of all places for my life to fall apart, why did it have to be the driveway where we used to unload groceries together? I drove back to the resort on what I can only describe as emotional autopilot. I do not remember half the turns I took. I do remember that I kept switching between crying and going completely blank. At one red light, I actually wiped my face, looked straight ahead, and thought, if I get hit right now, at least I won't have to decide what to do next. Which is dark, yes, but I'm telling you the truth. Not because I wanted to die, because I wanted not to have to think for maybe 5 full minutes. When I got back, everybody was outside on the lawn doing some stupid group game with cups. I parked badly. Like, insult to driver's license badly. I grabbed a bottle from the kitchen, went into the nearest bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor in my nice little weekend outfit, drinking directly from the neck, like I had been cast in a cautionary ad about women who ignore their instincts. That is where my best friend found me. She knocked once, then again, then said my name in the tone people use when they already know the answer is bad. I opened the door, and the second I saw her face, I just lost it. Not graceful tears. Not one cinematic drop rolling down the cheek. I mean ugly, breathless, humiliating crying. The kind where words come out in scraps and mucus becomes part of the experience. She pulled me up off the floor and got me into one of the bedrooms away from everybody else. It took me forever to explain because every time I got to the part about the phone call, I wanted to scream. I played her the audio. She went so still while listening that it actually scared me. Then she put the phone down and said, I will help you bury him, which, to be clear, was not a literal crime threat. It was friendship in its purest form. For an hour or two, maybe more, I just swung between fury and collapse. I said I wanted to call him and ruin his life. Then I said I never wanted to hear his voice again. I said I should go back and throw every wedding item into the yard. Then I said maybe I should disappear and let him explain to everybody why the bride evaporated. My best friend let me spiral for a bit because she knows interrupting the first wave is useless. Then she asked the only question that actually mattered. What hurts most right now? I said. That he gets to choose the story if I confront him. And there it was. Because if I stormed in, he would pivot. Men like him always pivot. Suddenly it would be about the fight, the misunderstanding, my timing, my reaction, my invasion, my anger, my tone. The betrayal would still exist, sure, but now inside a mess he helped create and then narrate. I did not want to become one more woman standing in a room full of people being told she was overreacting to the thing he forced her to witness. That was the first moment the cancellation idea took shape, not as some brilliant revenge plan. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't strategic in a glamorous way. It was survival. I wanted one thing, maybe the only thing still available to me, control over my own exit. I didn't need to scream to know what happened. No, I didn't need his confession to validate the car, the call, the voices, the recording. What I needed was to stop him from dressing himself in my forgiveness before I'd even finished bleeding. So I said, I'm not marrying him. My best friend nodded like she had known that from the moment she heard the audio. Then she said, okay, then let's think. The next morning, after maybe 2 hours of sleep and 10 years of emotional aging, I checked out early. I told the others I had a family thing come up, which wasn't even a lie if you count discovering your fiancé is a lying idiot as a family event. My best friend came with me. I wasn't ready to be alone, and she wasn't willing to let me go anywhere unsupervised while I still had that specific numb look people get when they are one bad idea away from changing their own storyline permanently. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The thought of walking back into that bedroom made my skin crawl. I stayed at her place instead, sleeping in borrowed clothes, eating dry cereal at her kitchen counter, and answering his messages with the bland politeness of a hostage negotiating for time. He texted like nothing had happened. That part still gets me. He asked if I was feeling better. He said he missed me. He said his parents wanted to know what time we were arriving at the venue on the wedding day. He told me he might stay with them the night before the ceremony to make logistics easier, and also, he said, build anticipation. I almost laughed out loud reading that. Build anticipation. Sir, what you built was a crater. What? I responded carefully because by then I understood that the closer we got to the wedding, the more dangerous honesty would become if I wasn't ready to pull the trigger on everything. I said I was emotional and wanted to preserve the surprise of the day. He ate that up. Of course he did. Nothing flatters a liar like being mistaken for loved. Meanwhile, my best friend drove by the house once just to see. The same unfamiliar car was there again. Again. That should not have shocked me, but it did. Maybe because some naive little parasite inside me had still been hoping the first time had been an isolated disaster, a panic decision, a singular act of idiocy, not an active situation with repeat parking habits. But there it was. Same driveway, same disrespect, same man. The next day I went back to the house alone because I needed clothes and documents and whatever was left of my self-respect that might have been trapped under a pile of wedding stationery. The place was spotless in that suspicious, overcorrected way guilty people clean. The bed was made too neatly. The counters were wiped. There was one scented candle burning in the living room that I had never bought, which made me stare so hard I thought I might set it on fire with my mind. I packed what mattered. Work clothes, passport, laptop, jewelry from my grandmother, the small, ugly mug I liked because my fiancé had once said it looked depressed, and I'm petty enough to rescue objects out of spite. I left anything that felt contaminated or replaceable. Then I sat at the kitchen table and looked around the house we had built one budget spreadsheet at a time. The couch I paid more toward. The dishes I picked out. The framed print above the hallway table that he swore he loved and probably never noticed. It all felt fake now. Not because none of it happened, but because betrayal retroactively cheapens ordinary happiness. It takes moments that were real to you and coats them in suspicion until you can't touch them without feeling stupid. He came by while I was still there. I heard the key in the door and every muscle in my body locked. I had thought I might be ready if this happened. I was not. He walked in with coffee, smiling, talking before he could even fully see me. "Hey, I thought you were staying with..." Then he stopped. He read the room wrong immediately. You could see it happening. He knew something was off, but he thought it was regular wedding tension. Maybe an argument, maybe nerves. Maybe I had found some text he forgot to delete, but not the whole truth. He actually tried to kiss my cheek. I turned away. He looked confused, then concerned, then softly defensive. "What's going on?" And this is where you may expect a dramatic confrontation. You will not get one, because real life is meaner and weirder than fiction. I looked at him and understood in one sick flash that if I started, I would either not stop or not say enough. There was no middle ground. So I didn't confront him there. Not fully. I just said I was overwhelmed and didn't want to talk. I told him I needed space before the wedding. He asked if I was mad. I said yes. He asked if it was my mother. I almost choked. Imagine being betrayed by someone so deeply and still being forced to admire the stupidity of his guesses. He tried to pull me into a hug. I stepped back. He looked wounded, which made me want to put my own head through drywall. Then he started apologizing for being distracted lately, for work stress, for not being present, for any way he had added pressure during planning. It was unbelievable. He was apologizing around the betrayal like a man trying not to mention the elephant because maybe if he compliments the curtains, it will leave on its own. I let him talk just long enough to confirm what I already knew. He thought he still had time. Time to manage me. Time to smooth this down. Time to walk into the wedding and marry me under a version of reality he preferred. When he finally paused, I said I needed to be alone and that I might go stay with family until the wedding day. He asked if we were okay. I said, "We'll see." That answer haunted him for approximately 0 seconds because he wanted it to mean pre-ceremony nerves, not doom. He left that evening to stay with his parents, exactly as planned. I watched him go with a duffel bag and a cheerful little wave like I wasn't standing in a doorway, holding back the urge to tell him that if there is a hell, I hope it has seating charts and fake vows and a scented candle you hate. Once he was gone, I called my grandmother. She was the only person in my family I trusted not to turn this into a lecture about appearances or endurance, or the sacred institution of keeping your mouth shut in pearls. She listened without interrupting. Really listened. No gasps for attention. No, "Are you sure?" No immediate pivot into her own opinions. When I finished, all she said was, "Come here if you need to disappear for a while." That almost made me cry more than the cheating itself. Not because it was dramatic. Because kindness, when you are humiliated, hits like a crack in the dam. I told her I might take her up on it. She said her guest room was ready whether I arrived with 2 bags or none. Then came the ugly practical part. I drafted an email canceling the wedding. Do you know how surreal it is to type a sentence explaining that your marriage will not be taking place because the man in question is sleeping with somebody else in your home while telling you he loves you? It feels fake even as you type it. Like you're writing a messy cousin's crisis and somehow your own name keeps appearing in the details. I kept the email simple because I was too tired to make it poetic. I wrote it that night and left it unsent. Not to his side. Not to mine. Not yet. That night, after he left for his parents' place, I stayed only long enough to gather a few more things and make the calls I had been avoiding. My mother called first with wedding questions, and that was when I finally told her the truth. She asked if I was sure, which made me furious. But once I sent the audio and the photos, both of my parents understood exactly what kind of man he was. Later that night, I called my grandmother again just to hear the one voice that never made me defend my own pain. The next 6 days before the wedding turned into a creepy little theater production where only one person knew the show had already been canceled. He kept texting sweet things, asking if he should bring anything to my parents' place after the ceremony, asking if I wanted to keep the top tier of the cake or freeze individual slices like people in bad advice columns. He sent a heart emoji every night like routine could cover rot. There's something deeply unsettling about being lied to by someone who still expects affection in return. It makes every normal exchange feel infected. I played along just enough to keep him calm. Not because I enjoyed it. God, no. Half the time I had to put my phone down and walk around the room afterward like I had swallowed bleach. But I knew if I pulled away too hard, too soon, he would sense it. Then I would have to deal with confrontation before I was ready. And I had already decided I was not spending the final days before this disaster comforting the man who caused it. My parents came around slowly. My mother asked to see what I had. I sent her the audio recording and the photos of that woman's car in my driveway from more than one day. Not enough for some dramatic courtroom show, maybe. But enough for normal people living in the real world. Enough to know. My father called me after listening and sounded angrier than I'd expected. Not loud angry. Worse. Quiet angry. The kind that comes out clipped and careful. He said, "You do not owe him a performance of forgiveness." That helped more than he probably knows. There were still practical issues. Vendors, deposits, guests. My inbox looked like a woman's dream wedding had been taken hostage by spreadsheets. I handled what I could with a numb kind of efficiency. The event space had a balance still due because we had scheduled the final payment close to the date. I left it that way. Not as some mastermind move, more because I genuinely had not gotten around to it with all the chaos. Still, once I realized the timing, I didn't rush to fix it. Let consequences find the right doorstep for once. On Friday night, the night before the wedding, I packed one suitcase and drove to my grandmother's place in another state. The drive was long enough to make me feel like I was peeling myself out of a life layer by layer. My phone wouldn't stop lighting up, friends checking in, a cousin asking where I'd be getting ready, him sending me a selfie from the place where he was staying, smiling like a man with a future. I muted everything except the few people who actually mattered. My grandmother opened the door in slippers and a robe and didn't say a single dramatic thing. She just took one look at my face and pulled me into her kitchen. She made tea, even though I didn't want tea. Older women believe hot liquids can do things therapy only dreams of. I sat at her table under a too bright light and finally let myself say it cleanly, without choking around it. He cheated. In our home. While I was away because he pushed me to go. She pressed her lips together, nodded once, and asked if I wanted to stay hidden or make a statement. That was her exact wording, which is why I adore her. No moralizing, no soft-focused nonsense about healing. Hidden or statement. Your move. I said both. 1 week after I discovered the truth, on the Saturday morning that was supposed to be our wedding day, while he was getting dressed and people were steaming tablecloths and pretending romance is just logistics plus flowers, I loaded my suitcase back into the car outside my grandmother's house and opened the email I had drafted days earlier. Not long. Not theatrical. Just the truth. I had discovered infidelity, the wedding was canceled, and I would not be discussing details further that day. I sent it to my guests and left out a handful of mutual contacts who might warn him too early. Petty? Maybe. Efficient? Absolutely. Then I turned off my location, ignored the first wave of calls, and kept driving. By the time the ceremony was supposed to begin, I was sitting in my grandmother's living room in leggings and an old sweatshirt, staring at my phone as it lit up like an electrical fire. His name, my mother, my father, unknown numbers, then my best friend. I answered only her. She whispered, "It's chaos." I closed my eyes. Good, I thought. Not because I enjoy destruction. I don't. But because for once the chaos was finally in the right room. According to my best friend, the unraveling started small and then turned all at once. At first, people just noticed I wasn't there. Not panicked, not suspicious, just mildly annoyed in that wedding way where everybody assumes the bride is in some side room being sprayed, pinned, powdered, zipped, and emotionally overmanaged by a cluster of women with bobby pins. He was apparently calm too, walking around greeting people, checking his phone, smiling for relatives, playing the part. Which makes sense. Liars usually do best when they think they still control the timing. Then my email started reaching people. Guests from my side stopped murmuring and started showing each other their screens. One aunt apparently gasped loud enough to turn heads. Somebody asked one of the bridesmaids if this was real. Somebody else went to find my mother. My best friend said you could actually watch the energy in the room change, like a temperature drop before a storm. Not explosive. Worse. Public and creeping. He kept calling me, over and over. No answer. Then he started texting. "Where are you? What is this? Please answer me." Then a few minutes later, "We can explain this. We can fix this." We, fascinating choice of pronoun from a man who had recently been very committed to solo decisions. At some point, his father tried to smooth things over by telling people there had been an emergency, and that the ceremony would be delayed. Meanwhile, the event manager, who I still think deserves a small civic award for professionalism under absurdity, began asking very practical questions about the remaining balance, the cancellation terms, and who exactly was taking responsibility for the expenses already triggered that day. That's where the financial humiliation entered. We had not finished paying the venue. I had delayed the last chunk because money had already been bleeding out of me from every direction, and now suddenly there they were, in formal clothes, negotiating payment for a wedding that was collapsing in real time. His father ended up stepping in and putting his name down to cover what needed covering to avoid an even bigger mess right there in the lobby. According to my best friend, that was the moment he stopped defending his son with his face. Something in him shifted. Pride, maybe. Or just the shock of seeing stupidity become invoice-sized. Later that afternoon, when the whole thing had spread through both families, I finally turned my phone back on. The screen flooded with messages, each one cycling through the same predictable stages. Confusion, pleading, anger, self-pity. I read a few because apparently pain and curiosity are roommates. Please talk to me. This isn't what it looks like. You blindsided me. How could you do this publicly? We could have handled this privately. I made a mistake. I love you. Please just let me explain. That last one almost made me laugh. Explain what, exactly? The driveway? The phone call? The woman in my bed? The fact that he had enough confidence to push me out of the house for the weekend and then lie to my face while I was staring at his car in the garage? I did not answer him that day. Or the next. Or the one after. My parents went back to the house to collect the rest of my things. I gave them a list over the phone, room by room, because there is no part of heartbreak more humiliating than having to remember where you stored your passport while your father silently processes the man he nearly called family. They packed what mattered. Documents, a few boxes, my work clothes, jewelry, some random kitchen stuff I wanted only because I had paid for it and spite is a renewable resource. He was there when they arrived. According to my father, he looked awful. Pale, unshaven, like a man who had slept in the clothes he deserved. He kept asking where I was, kept saying he needed to talk to me, kept trying to frame the whole thing as something that had gotten out of hand, which is such an interesting way to describe your own choices, when consequences finally stop letting you narrate them as accidents. My father told him very plainly that nobody had forced him to cheat, nobody had forced him to lie, and nobody had forced him to turn our shared home into whatever disgusting little setup he'd been running. My mother, who had started out the week asking if I should hear him out, apparently looked at him and said, "You don't get to ask for grace from the person you humiliated." That was a nice surprise. I had left a note in the kitchen before I went to my grandmother's. Short, simple. I know. Don't contact me. Next to it were the printed photos of that woman's car in the driveway on more than one day. My father said he stared at them for a long time without speaking. Good. Let him enjoy the stillness. The first couple of weeks after the wedding, that wasn't felt less like a clean break and more like living inside the smoke after something burned down. Everybody had opinions. That was probably inevitable. Some people were fully on my side without qualification. Some people did that awful balance take thing where they condemn cheating in theory but also gently suggest maybe public humiliation was a lot. A few mutual friends clearly wanted to stay in good standing with both of us, which translated into them speaking like bored diplomats while I was still trying not to cry in grocery stores. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town because I couldn't stand the idea of staying in that house, not even if legally and financially I might have had grounds to dig in for a while. I didn't want to win square footage. I wanted my nervous system back. The apartment had thin walls, unreliable water pressure, and one window that looked onto a parking lot with exactly one tragic tree trying its best. It was perfect. Not glamorous. Not triumphant. Just mine. Money was tighter than I wanted to admit. Weddings are basically a bonfire you feed with your checking account, and even with some refunds, a lot of what I had spent was simply gone. I picked up extra shifts at work. I stopped ordering takeout. I learned how many dinners a woman can make out of eggs, rice, and spite. Meanwhile, I heard through the little underground tunnel system that his mutual acquaintances that he had to move out too because he couldn't afford the rent without me. That did not give me joy exactly, but it did give me a very human, very imperfect sense of balance. Actions, consequences, revolutionary concept. His parents didn't cut him off, but they weren't exactly celebrating him either. Apparently, he stayed with them for a while, and the atmosphere was tense enough to qualify as a weather event. From what I heard later, they helped him in practical ways, but stopped defending him out loud, which honestly felt like the most realistic outcome. His mother reached out once with a message that tried very hard to sound neutral, and landed somewhere around carefully disappointed. She said she was sorry for the pain caused and hoped someday there could be peace. I appreciated the apology and ignored the hope. Peace is not the same thing as access. My own family surprised me in mixed ways. My father became unexpectedly protective without being overbearing, which was honestly moving because he is not a man who thrives in emotional territory. My mother, on the other hand, kept circling back to presentation, not because she cared more about image than me exactly, but because image is the language she uses when she doesn't know what to do with pain. She worried about who knew what. She worried about how people would frame it. She worried that my silence made room for rumors. I finally told her that anybody concerned about the reputation of a canceled wedding was welcome to marry him themselves. That bought me a blessed 48 hours of quiet. Later, when the worst of it settled, she got better. Not perfect, just better. Less worried about appearances, more worried about whether I was eating and sleeping. The hardest part wasn't even the rage. Rage is active, useful sometimes. It gets you through packing boxes and changing passwords and calling utility companies with a normal voice while your whole inner life is sitting on the floor. He tried reaching out through people more than once. Mutual friends. His mother once, a cousin who should have minded her own business. It was always the same thing in new wrapping paper. He wanted to explain. He wanted one conversation. He wanted closure. He wanted me to hear his side. I shut it down every time. Not because I was strong every second. Sometimes I was furious. Sometimes I was shaking. Sometimes I wanted to answer, just to ask if he genuinely thought the problem was that I had not heard enough. But I had already lived through enough of his version of events. Getting over it wasn't a straight line up. Some mornings I felt almost normal. Then I'd hear a certain laugh in a restaurant or catch the smell of his laundry soap on a stranger in an elevator, and my whole body would tense like it expected impact. My best friend said that was normal. She was right. I didn't miss him in the way people assume. I missed the version of my life that hadn't been contaminated yet. I missed certainty. I missed feeling stupid only in the fun, harmless ways. About 4 months later, I got careless, not emotionally, logistically. I had settled into routines, the kind that make you think danger has gotten bored and moved on. Same coffee shop near work twice a week, same table if it was open, same stupid blueberry muffin I kept pretending I'd stop ordering because it tasted like sugar wearing a disguise. I hadn't seen him in months. Hadn't even thought about running into him. That was my mistake. I had started to believe the city was big enough for both of us to disappear into different corners and never collide. I was wrong. It was one of the first places in the city that felt detached from him, from wedding planning, from mutual friends, from all the little haunted corners of the year before. So when I walked in one Thursday and saw him already there near the window, my first thought wasn't fear or anger. It was calculation. He hadn't been there before. Not once in the 3 months I'd been coming here. Which meant either this was a miserable coincidence, or he had figured out my patterns. Neither option made me feel safe. I actually stopped mid-step hard enough for the woman behind me to bump my shoulder. He stood up immediately. Not rushing toward me, just enough to signal intent. He looked thinner, tired. Not ruined, not broken, not dramatically transformed by guilt in some deeply satisfying way. Just worn around the edges, which annoyingly made him look more sympathetic. Men have an unfair relationship with damage. They get 1 good week of bad sleep, and suddenly they look like a poem to people who should know better. "I'm not here to cause a scene," he said. I laughed once. "That's generous." He asked if he could sit for 5 minutes. I should have walked out. I know. But part of me wanted to hear what kind of nonsense could survive this long in his head and still come out dressed as explanation. Also, and let's be honest, there was ego in it. Curiosity. The almost anthropological urge to study the creature that thought I might still be available for conversation after everything. So I sat. I did keep my bag on my lap like I was ready to flee a minor fire. He noticed. Good. He started talking too fast, the way people do when they know they have a narrow window and a terrible case. He said he wasn't there to pressure me. He said he just needed me to hear the truth from him once. Which was funny because I had, in a way, through a partially closed curtain. According to him, it hadn't been an emotional affair. Not a relationship. Not even ongoing in the serious sense. It was physical, he said. Isolated, stupid, meaningless. A woman he knew through work. Someone with a reputation for discreet situations. I didn't ask for her name. I didn't want it. Knowing who she was wouldn't change what he had done, and honestly, she wasn't the one who had promised me forever. He was. She owed me nothing. He owed me everything. He used that phrase, discreet situations, like he was a man in a suit discussing weather patterns, instead of admitting he had been sleeping around in the lead-up to our wedding. He said he had gotten into his head about marriage, about permanence, about being chosen once and choosing once forever. He claimed he had panicked and wanted to get curiosity out of his system before the wedding, which is such a rotten, selfish thought process. I actually felt the air go thin around me. Not because it shocked me by then. Because he still expected language like curiosity to make the offense sound smaller. Like what he had done was some pathetic bachelor impulse instead of deliberate betrayal. I let him talk. That was probably my first mistake in the meeting. Silence encourages men like him. They start mistaking your restraint for openness. He kept going. Said he had never stopped loving me. Said it was never about replacing me. Said the wedding was real to him. Said he'd planned to end it and commit fully and bury the whole thing. Which, wow, thank you. How lucky I was almost allowed to marry into a secret cleanup operation. When I finally spoke, my voice surprised even me. Calm, Flat. So your defense is that you intended to lie forever? He flinched, but only for a second. No, he said. My defense is that it was ugly and stupid and didn't mean what it looked like. That sentence sat between us like spoiled milk. I asked if he had been with her only once. He hesitated. Tiny pause. That was answer enough. I smiled without any joy and looked down at my coffee because apparently even then, a small part of me preferred my humiliation in manageable servings. He started saying my name in that softer tone he used when he wanted me to re-enter a dynamic where he explained and I softened. I cut him off. Don't talk to me like I'm still your person. His eyes did that wounded thing. I hated that too. Because hurt can be real even in guilty people, and seeing it can trigger all your old habits. Comforting, clarifying, taking responsibility for the emotional temperature in the room. I had done that for years without calling it what it was. Not this time. He said he was trying to take responsibility. I said no. You're trying to survive your own image of yourself. That shut him up for a moment. Then, because apparently humiliation has layers, he changed strategies. He started saying I could have confronted him that day. Right there. In the house. On the phone. Before the wedding. As if I had somehow chosen the public collapse when there had been a simpler route available. Which was rich. Incredible, really. The man who cheated in our home while I was gone at a pre-wedding event wanted to critique my methods. He said, "You didn't have to destroy everything." I actually laughed then. Not because it was funny. Because the nerve of that sentence deserved sound. "You destroyed it," I said. "I just refused to help you hide it." He rubbed his face, looked down, looked up again. Then came the pivot I should have predicted. He brought up his parents. How devastated they were. How humiliating it had been for them. How his father had to cover the venue costs. There it was, the old trick. Widen the circle of pain until the person you hurt starts feeling responsible for everybody except herself. I did feel something, to be honest. Not guilt, exactly. More like sadness with edges. I'm not a monster. I knew the fallout reached beyond him. But consequences do not become injustice just because they spread. I told him I was leaving. He asked for one more minute. Then he said something so outrageous it almost made the whole conversation worth it just for the story. He said if I could find a way to move past how it happened, he would be willing to forgive the way I handled the cancellation. Forgive me. I sat there staring at this man like I had discovered a species evolution had meant to phase out. He saw my face and backtracked. Fast. He said that wasn't what he meant exactly. He said we had both hurt each other. He said we had both acted in anger. He said maybe we could start from the fact that neither of us had been at our best. No, absolutely not. There are moments in life when the final bit of affection you are clinging to gets burned off clean. No theatrics, no collapse, just gone. That was one of them. Any lingering softness I had left toward the person I thought he used to be died right there under the smell of coffee and blueberry syrup. Then he mentioned the money. Specifically the portion of the wedding expenses I had fronted. He said his parents had been on him about it. Not in a punishing way, he claimed, but in that disappointed Catholic guilt way where nobody yells but everybody suffers. His mother had apparently said that whatever else he had done, leaving me financially worse off, was indefensible. His father had said something about being a man and taking responsibility for at least the measurable damage. So here he was, offering to pay me back for what I had personally spent. I could hear the discomfort in his voice. This wasn't generosity. This was his family forcing him to act like an adult, probably with the threat of losing their remaining support if he didn't. Which meant this repayment wasn't about me. It was about him salvaging his relationship with people whose approval still mattered to him. But here's the thing about motivation. I didn't need his to be pure. I just needed the money. What happened is I looked at him for a second, then said I wasn't promising anything, but paying back what I had put in would be a start if he truly wanted to show accountability. The relief in his face hit me so hard I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He heard hope where there was strategy. He heard maybe. He heard the old me, the one who left room, the one who understood context, the one who could be moved by effort. Meanwhile, I was sitting there thinking, you really did all this and still think money buys you emotional leverage. Incredible. We left that conversation with a very narrow agreement. He would transfer the amount I had directly covered, in parts if necessary. I would unblock him only long enough to coordinate the logistics. Nothing else was promised, but he left acting like the door had cracked open. That was his interpretation, not mine. My best friend called it emotional collections work. My grandmother called it getting your money back from a fool. I preferred my grandmother's version. Over the next 2 months, he became the most determined payer I had ever seen. Amazing what motivation can do. He took extra work, borrowed from somebody, cut expenses, and sent long messages framed like accountability, but always drifting towards sentiment. He'd confirm a transfer amount, then add some line about missing my laugh. He'd ask whether I received the payment, then mention he had driven past the old apartment and thought of me. He would act almost respectful for 3 messages, then slip and start sounding hopeful, like he believed every transaction was also a stitch closing the wound. I kept my responses minimal. Received. Noted. Send by Friday. That kind of thing. Dry enough to discourage romance, polite enough not to threaten the payment stream. If that sounds cynical, fine. I call it post-betrayal literacy. Some nights, after reading his messages, I would feel weirdly hollow. Not tempted, just tired. There is something exhausting about keeping a liar close enough to settle an account without letting him back into your life. It's like carrying a box with broken glass in it. You can do it. You just can't relax your grip. Around the middle of that period, he sent a longer message saying he knew he had no right to ask for anything, but paying me back had made him realize how much he had taken for granted. He said losing me had clarified everything. He said he was ashamed of the man he had been and was trying to become somebody worthy of even speaking to me again. That almost got me. Not romantically, intellectually, because there is always a tiny dangerous part of you that wants the pain to have produced wisdom. You want your suffering to at least force growth in the person who caused it. Otherwise, it feels wasteful on top of cruel. But growth is not my reward to monitor. And shame is not transformation just because it uses reflective language. I did not answer the speech. I just sent him the outstanding balance figure again. He replied, okay. Then, 10 minutes later, you used to know how to hurt me with one sentence. I stared at that and thought, no, remembering is the problem. Instead, I locked my phone and cried in my kitchen for 10 minutes, like a woman ambushed by her own nostalgia. Then I washed my face, called my best friend, and let her talk me down by reminding me that a memory is not a payment, and regret is not repair. The first transfer came through 2 days later. Not the full amount, just the first substantial chunk. When I saw it land in my account, I felt a rush so mixed I had to sit down. Relief, vindication, disgust, power, sadness. Money doesn't heal betrayal, obviously. But recovering something tangible after months of swallowing losses felt like closing my hand around a piece of myself he did not get to keep. He texted right after to confirm it arrived. I answered yes. Then he said, I meant what I said. I want to make this right in every way I can. I looked at the message and thought, no, you want the story to end with your redemption, because the version where I simply leave is unbearable to you. I did not text that, though. I just wrote, send the timeline for the rest. He replied with hearts. I stared at those for a long second, and then put my phone across the room like it had become sticky. The next 6 weeks became a strange kind of business relationship. The middle stretch of that arrangement was strangely exhausting because it looked calm from the outside. People assume the worst part of a breakup is the big rupture. The cheating, the canceled wedding, the screaming, the public shame. But there's another stage after that, quieter and in some ways more dangerous, where the crisis is over and you're left negotiating with residue. Emails, objects, shared subscriptions, deposits, accounts, explanations, the boring little administrative ghosts of a life that no longer exists. He sent the second transfer after taking out a loan, which he made sure I knew because apparently men cannot suffer financially without also wanting applause for the narrative arc. He told me the interest rate was bad. He told me he was picking up work wherever he could. He told me he understood if I didn't care, but he wanted me to know he was serious, again with the performance of humility, again with the need to be seen trying. Sometimes he'd sneak in little memories, a song lyric, a reference to a trip we once took. A random sentence like, I drove past that little diner you used to love. They were all bait. Not even subtle bait. Emotional fishing with expired worms. I ignored every single one. That doesn't mean I never got angry enough to answer in my head. I absolutely did. I just got better at keeping the sharpest parts of me offline. There is no medal for restraint, which is unfortunate because by then I had earned at least bronze. When I wanted to lash out, I wrote things in my notes app and deleted them. When I wanted to ask whether the other woman had also gotten a speech about curiosity, I called my best friend instead. When I wanted to know if he ever lay awake thinking about the exact moment he traded a future for an ego itch, I went for a walk and let myself be mad without making it interactive. Work helped more than people realize. Not because labor is healing or whatever inspirational nonsense gets printed on mugs, because routine gives pain less room to improvise. I had deadlines, irritated clients, a supervisor who communicated exclusively through urgency, and enough daily friction to keep me from dissolving into self-mythology. I didn't want to become the woman who could only talk about the wedding that didn't happen. I wanted to be the woman who went through that, and still remembered how to answer emails and buy detergent and laugh at dumb things in line at the pharmacy. My father took me to dinner one evening, just the two of us, which still felt slightly surreal because our relationship had always relied on side-by-side affection rather than explicit emotional discussion. We sat in a little neighborhood restaurant with sticky menus and terrible lighting, and after a long silence, he asked if keeping contact open for the money was messing with my head. I said yes, but losing that money had messed with my life too. He nodded. Then he said something I kept thinking about for days. Just make sure you know the price of every conversation. That was exactly it. Every exchange cost something. Focus, energy, emotional drag. Even when I was in control, Even when I kept it dry and transactional, access is never free, especially for somebody who has already used it badly. I started becoming even stricter after that. Fewer words, no warmth, no punctuation that could be misread as softness, efficient, almost cold. It worked. He noticed. One message came in late one night that was more honest than most of the others. Maybe because exhaustion had finally burned away his tactics. He wrote, "It feels like you talk to me like I'm a utility company." I read that and barked out a laugh so sudden I scared myself. Because yes, exactly. That was the relationship now. A reluctant service provider resolving a debt. I did not answer that part. I just replied, "Remaining amount?" He sent it the next morning. There were still moments of weakness, but not in the direction he probably imagined. I never seriously considered taking him back. What I did feel sometimes was the ache of wanting the entire year erased, wanting to be the version of myself who had still been building a seating chart and worrying about appetizers, wanting not to carry this story around in my body. The temptation was never him, it was amnesia. The final transfer date kept shifting, but eventually he pinned down a week. He said once that was done, maybe we could have one real conversation with everything finally on the table. He used the phrase closure, which I have come to think is just emotional glitter. People throw it everywhere because it sounds meaningful and makes a mess. I told him we'd discuss next steps after the payment cleared. There were no next steps. Not really. But by then, I knew better than to announce the ending before the money landed. Practicality is not romance, but it is a very loyal friend once you finally start letting it drive. The final payment arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at my desk pretending to care about a spreadsheet. My phone buzzed, I glanced down, and there it was. The remaining amount, complete, ugly in origin, beautiful in effect. For a second, I just stared at the screen because anticipation had stretched this moment so long, I had stopped trusting it would actually happen. Then my whole body loosened in one sharp, weird wave. Not joy. More like the release of a muscle I hadn't realized I'd been clenching for months. He texted almost immediately. "It's done." Then another one. "Can we talk now?" Really talk? There it was. The thing he'd been paying toward in his own mind all along. Not the debt. Access. Narrative. A final hearing where he could present his better self, and maybe convince both of us that effort had changed the meaning of what happened. I put my phone down and went to the bathroom because I wanted to answer from a place that wasn't fueled by adrenaline. Progress, right? Look at me, behaving like a person with an impulse filter. In the mirror, I looked ordinary, tired, a little older around the eyes than I had been before the wedding year. Lipstick half gone, hair fighting humidity. Just a woman in an office bathroom about to close a door that had already been closed in her heart for a long time. That steadied me more than any speech could have. I went back to my desk and typed the message I'd been drafting in my head for weeks. I told him I had agreed to stay in contact for one reason only. Repayment. I told him that was complete now, and so was any obligation between us. I said he had mistaken access for hope and persistence for change. I said loving me would have required honesty before damage, not regret after consequences. I said I didn't want another explanation, another apology, or another attempt to resize what he had done into something survivable for his own conscience. I told him I was not interested in being the woman who helps him feel like he isn't that kind of man. He would have to live with deciding that on his own. Then I added the only sentence that felt truly mine in that moment. "A woman should fight for a man worth keeping, and you proved you weren't." I read it twice, took out one line that sounded too polished, made another line meaner, then changed it back. When I finally hit send, my hand was steady. He answered faster than I expected. "Please don't do this." I laughed softly at my desk, which made my coworker glance over like I might be finally losing it. Then another message came. "I know I don't deserve much, but after everything, after paying it all back, I thought maybe there was at least a chance to start a real conversation." That part irritated me so deeply I could feel heat rise under my skin. After paying it all back. As if restitution had become romantic currency. As if he had purchased the right to be reconsidered. I did not answer. I blocked the number again, then the email, then every other route I knew he might try. Thoroughly, calmly. No dramatic music, no tears. Just click, confirm, done. It was one of the least cinematic moments of my life, which is probably why it mattered. A week later, I used part of the money to replace things I had been patching together since the breakup. A decent mattress, a real kitchen table, groceries without mental math. I put the rest into savings and felt lighter. Not healed, but closer. He didn't lose me because I exposed him. He lost me when he decided I was easier to lie to than worth telling the truth. I left because love that asks for your dignity back in installments isn't love.